Today we have Xin Liu, who is currently the Artist Curator of the Media Lab Space Initiative. She also has an artistic practice. She's an artist and engineer and started out as an engineer and then was at the Media Lab in the Fluid Interfaces where she got her master's. I'm just going to read a little artist statement, if you will, that I thought was nice. Mixing scientific research with personal narratives, she creates transformative, participatory experiences and bodily objects to examine the constitution of subjectivity and effects. Conventionally trained as an engineer, she claims technology as her native language and craft and art practice. In the midst of the paradigm shift between technology and humanity, she tries to weave new connections for active participation. The goal is to reconfigure the tools of technology not for exploitation, but for the recovery of human feelings, affects, and emotions. Not for hegemonic control of life, but for the discovery of a bottom-up evolution through subjective experience.
Thank you. Hi everyone, this is me. And for my website, there's 9x there, so you need to count. So someone was trying to count, that helps a little bit. So my name is Xin Liu. Xin sounds a little bit like Xing, you know, it might help with pronunciation. I'm an artist and an engineer, and thank you, Sarah, so much for inviting me. I walk past by here a lot when I was a grad student, so it's very nice here to be here today and share my work. So today I'm going to talk about my practice, and definitely will share a bit about my work in MIT now and then. And it'll be relatively interactive, so I hope people can like feel free to ask questions through the talk, because I think it's really about sharing the process itself rather than, oh, I did this great thing and applause. So feel free to jump in anytime. So I'm born in Xinjiang. If you know that area, is the west-north part of China. The city I grew up in is called Kramen. It means black oil in Uyghur, which is a minority language of Chinese Muslim. So it's kind of very far there, very close to Moscow and bordering about 30 different countries in that area. So the generation of my grandparents, in kind of responding to the call of like China Western development, moved there in their 20s. So they're all like from the ocean side of China on the east, and then they moved all over to the west when they were like my age, I guess. So there they pumped oil from the ground and channeling water from Irtysh River, which is actually from Russia. So they like literally pumped a river all the way dig through to get to the land I grew up in to kind of facilitate the agriculture there, because you need to feed people who are digging the oil out of the ground. And this is kind of like the satellite image of like certain oil land in my hometown, which I found really interesting because now I work with space exploration, and this is the SpaceX rendering of Mars settlement. And this kind of resemblance for me really like a click. This kind of tightly arranged grid on like a very barren landscape is really something shocking for me to think about, how like this kind of power and ego and like potential of humanity we have on top of the nature and the world we are existing. It's like great and horrifying at the same time for me, but I found that very interesting. And apart from kind of a natural resource extraction, the entire state is also under attack at this point. I want to say the state is like province in China, that's the right term. If you study a little bit about Xinjiang, you will find some New York Times article. I will not go into details about it here. But for me, like this is my hometown. You can see this kind of like green part is actually the agriculture part, which is like very nicely neatly graded, like a little bit like California if you fly over there. So for me, it's really the question like who lived there and how their daily life is the kind of result from like our technology and political and historical decisions and organizations. So And what does it mean to like occupy a vacuum land and make a land of no one becoming your own? So that's kind of like my background and where I grew up. So now I'm kind of trying to tap into a bit more about what I do. So this is a very early piece of mine when I was like still a student back in Rhode Island School of Design. At the time, it was first time I moved to United States, and I didn't really know much about art or any expression, but I used to be a dancer when I was in undergrad and earlier age. And at the time, I have calls with my parents, and it's kind of exciting and bizarre to think about them as living in the future of mine. So I was thinking about time a lot at that point, and how the landscape is kind of literally cut into pieces if you consider a time zone on the Earth, which is also geopolitics, right? In like the ways that time zone have dramatic shift is always the place that's supposed to be no people living there. So in order to like kind of have a visceral reaction towards it, what I did at the time in Providence, well, it's very loud, is that I calculated how much the distance is on the ground is for the time difference of 1 second. So it's literally just like slicing the cake to a thinner strip. So it turns out at the latitude of Providence is about 365 meters long. So that's why I'm kind of created this kind of almost like sand tank and did this performance myself, just walking across the landscape. It was very kind of early work of mine, which I now looking back is very connected with what I'm doing now. So I often like to share this project. So this is like at the time, and then this little tank I made. So my background in undergrad is mechanical engineering, but the department is called Precision Instrument and Mechanical Engineering. And now looking back, oh, I maybe really like to measure stuff. So this piece is my thesis work when I graduated from RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. It's called Tier Set. So at the time, again, like, as you can tell, my approach is often like a personal inquiry and trying to like understand it through the methods I know, which is often scientific. And in this piece, what I did is like through the course of a month, every day I was trying to force myself to cry out of emotional reasons. So I watch a lot of like very sad videos on YouTube, like dog dying. There's a series of like a Thailand life insurance advertisement is super effective. But anyway, I was crying every day and collecting my tear for about like 10 milliliter every day, and I brought it to Brown University where I have like several collaborators, and we went through lots of very hideous processes to like analyze what's inside my tear. And after the course of a month, I got this kind of recipe of my own tear. And later for my exhibition, I would just order this kind of raw materials online from chemical companies and then make this big jar of my tears where I pump them out in exhibitions. So for this project, it's really kind of on multiple levels for me. At the time when I was in Providence, I had a lot of difficulty in like interact with people. I think now you think my English probably okay, but at the time I was like able to talk, but not really able to like be funny or like follow up conversation in the bar. I have a lot of like connection issues. So at the same time, like, you know, it's a very stressful time. About to graduate, and I kind of want to cry but feel kind of ashamed to cry. So like, what if I cry for my projects? So like a lot of like personal reasons for that. But at the same time, I think tear as a material itself is very interesting. Like this emotional material that is like, you know, almost three falls in a way that is like just biological liquid, but also a cultural sign and like a symbol. But at the same time, it's also like so deep in a way that's embedded in our society. So I found that kind of different layers of the material itself very interesting, and this project was also trying to like tear it apart and see once you disassemble it and reassemble it and through the process and what is still left in there. And one thing is very interesting is like through all those experiments I was doing through the process, it turns out that it's very difficult to analyze what's inside of your tear because scientifically people are not particularly interested in all the things in your body, components of your body, liquid. They only look at certain protein that has relationship with, for example, like your dry eye syndrome. They don't like analyze everything. Why do I care about like the ions in your tear? So in order to know that, I have to work with the geology department where so this device is called ICP, like a process that the way they use it to like grind rocks into dust and they burst into the chamber, fire it, and look at the color of the fire to decide what kind of ion there are and how much. So we kind of did the same thing with my tears, just burst into the chamber and fire it and look at the color, which I found is really interesting. And all this process was kind of like me forcefully begging and asking different people to help me analyzing my tears in a very unconventional way. It was a very fascinating process. And through the time of that month, I was crying every day. I was thinking about like crying and tearing, and that's the center like of my topic. So what I was thinking is like, it has to do with exchange, right? It's like if you only cry yourself, it doesn't make sense. You have to like get something back. So what I did is like, Amazon Mechanic Turk, right? So it's kind of online labor. So I post a job there and ask people to cry for me. And I post like a very short notice to say, hey, it's a bad day. I want to collect photos of people tearing for me. Can I submit a selfie or photo of you crying? So I would offer each person a quarter, which is a lot of money compared to what they are offered normally on Mechanic Turk, which is like 10 cents. So a quarter is a lot. And then through the course of a month, I got 30 pictures of different people sending me their pictures, and I kind of, search them online, just make sure they're not public files. But at the same time, I don't really care about the authenticity per se of this process. It's really interesting, the idea of presentation, emotional labor, and how does that work with us in this contemporary age. Because I have done once in my life posting a crying selfie on social media when I was like an undergrad. I'd probably just break up with my boyfriend or something like that. So I feel like it's very interesting to think about, this presentation of oneself crying and what does it mean. And this guy was my favorite because he looks like Justin Bieber. I don't know why, and kind of naked and crying. I was like, oh, this is great. And then when I show my work in general, I kind of tend to put them together. I feel like it's almost like a distant dialogue between them. And now there's a more further version of this work where I make these very little tear bottles, which is drawn inspiration from Victoria tear catchers. They're all hand-blowed glass bottles where I put this artificial tear in it. So I'm trying to exchange again with people, but asking for a little bit more. So this time asking for like 30 seconds of them crying, tearing videos in exchange of this art piece I made. So this is still ongoing, so if you're interested, please let me know.
Did the Turkers know that this was an art project?
I don't think they know. Yeah, but like when I bought them, I bought the pictures, right? So I kind of had the full ownership of this thing. But at the same time, it's really interesting that in Mechanical Turk, you are not supposed to do anything more than just their like ID or like the time they submit a file. You're not supposed to have conversation with them in a way. So it's like a really remote relationship. So I do wonder maybe one day one of them contact me and say something. I don't know. So that's kind of like you can see the kind of work I like to do when I was in RISD. I think it has a lot to do with emotion and measurement and this different aspect around it. So after that, I came to Media Lab, where it's like a very different context. And I think one thing I realized a lot is like daily that we become more and more measurable, right? Like in different, like either utopia or dystopia version of technology development, that we have this kind of artificial intelligence or like effective computing and all this kind of things that is really tapping into all the small details of the things we do, like each step you take, each smile you have. Like our body is almost kind of like the tank of leaking information everywhere and being observed at the same time. So that's the part I started to get kind of very excited about, because it's very related to my work in some way. But also I have a lot of questions around that, and what does it mean to have this capital surveillance in the modern age. So for my thesis work in MIT Media Lab, I was from the group called Fluid Interfaces. And you know, we have to invent and innovate in a way, and I think I was trying my best in a way to innovate with a critical lens. So this is a project I made, and I kind of put it out there in the world. I was very curious about what people think of it. So the work is called Mask. It's about the way you perceive yourself. So for example, right now, we know that respiration or body signals kind of tell us how we feel. Like it's often easily experienced that you walk into something and you feel your body reacting, or your breath get heavier, or your like gut twisting together before you get onto a stage and giving a talk. You know you're nervous before you're like even rationally aware of that fact. So I was interested in that kind of like different, what causes what. And then in this project, what I did is that I provided false feedback of your respiration. So it's kind of like a feedback loop. It senses your respiration at your nose, and then at the same time, it really quickly produces, synthesizes the sound of respiration and play back to you through bone conduction. So it's like as if I'm talking, but there's another sound that is like synchronized together with my voice, but it sounds slightly different, because we're not fully aware of how we breathe. For example, if I ask you when was your last breath, you probably don't really know, because our body naturally mute that signal. So if I provide a synchronized feedback, you just consider it, most people consider it just as your own respiration. So because of that, I could kind of trick people to think they are breathing differently than they actually are. And that gives me a lot of power in a way that I can make them to breathe slower than they thought or faster than they thought. Even if you don't have to breathe that way, but you think you breathe that way and still have an effect. So this is kind of how the system looked like. So this is a temperature sensor that captures breath at the nose draw, and then playing back the sound at, here with through bone conduction, which makes the sound a little bit more bodily and as if it's coming from your inside. And then I play with the sound texture. So because I cannot actually control when you inhale and exhale, so what I do mostly is to control the sound texture itself. For example, when you're breathing, like, but I can make the last bit of it like cut faster or later. But you don't really realize, because if I ask you when is the end of your breath, it's really hard to detect for us, or like, unless you're fully 100% concentrate on that. So that's a lot of room for me to play with. So with that, what happened is like I was doing user study, because this is kind of, you know, I have to prove my system works. There's something called misattribution of arousal, which means that people would misattribute what is causing their body to arouse. So what I did is, following this very famous study in the 60s, that what they asked the male subject to do is to walk past this very high bridge on some mountains, I don't know, and then the male, I don't know what's going on, male subject will walk across a bridge and meet two female. One is at the middle of the bridge, and the one is at the end of the bridge. And they have like kind of similar conversation because they would just ask same questions. And after they walk past by the bridge, they would ask the male subject, oh, who do you find, nicer? Like whose number do you want to have? That kind of question. And then statistically, the male subject would find the female in the middle of the bridge more interesting. And then the theory drawn from that is because you're at the middle of the bridge, it's very high, it's kind of scary, and so your breathing gets heavier, your heart beats faster, you even sweat a little bit, and that is very close body signal like sexual arousal, and then kind of play with your mind in a way make you find the person in front of you more interesting. So that I was very fascinated by that entire research. So what I did is asking about 20 male subjects from MIT, the age between 18 to 40, and then ask them to kind of looking at female pictures, like model headshots, and then randomize it, and like through the process, asking them to kind of rate the attractiveness and whether who is friendly and these kind of questions. While they were rating the different pictures, I was changing their respiration patterns. And then as a fact of the result for my study also, the male tend to rate the female more physically attractive when they are fake respiration from my device is making them thinking they are breathing heavier. So I, of course, have an entire chapter dedicated to why I only did study that is men looking at women. It's basically historically, that's the only kind of data set people have ever done. So in order to make my study valid, I either would only do male looking at female, or have to everything people have not done yet the other way around in order to draw a conclusion on the other channel. And at the time I was a master's student, so I wasn't able to finish my study on time. And also my advisor was suggesting that female would think male attractiveness with a little bit more data. So I was like, okay. So that's why I didn't do the other side. I always want to clear it up a little bit. But that was very interesting. And when the project came out, lots of people felt it was very exciting, but very uncomfortable at the same time, which I think is exactly what I'm trying to kind of provoke with this particular project. I think, we all know speculative design projects around that domain. And for me, it kind of is the question I try to ask, but at the same time working with the system I was in at the time. And it is an interesting thing to think about when you're an engineer or when you're a technologist in some way. Whatever you produce, like what kind of result it gonna have in the world, and what kind of question are you trying to ask. And yes, this kind of phenomena technique is pretty cool, but once you present it, maybe there's some other dimension that it has to be addressed, either explicitly or in a more hidden message. So that's kind of what I did when I was graduating from the Media Lab. And I can see my entire interest is always about measurement and the question about who we are and the way we perceive ourselves. And then later on, I got very lucky, start working more around outer space. And at the beginning, I feel like it's a little bit out of context about what I work on, suddenly change domain. But now I think slowly I kind of found my own position in that entire domain. First of all, I think space is really cool. No matter what kind of topic you're trying to engage, once it's in kind of an outer space context, I found it's easier to have the conversation. For example, right now I'm working with CAST. I think people know CAST, on diversifying space kind of visiting artist series, who we're actually invited to come. Ignis Mayer, she's having a talk on Friday about what is the future of our what is our planetary future? Are we still using the word of colonialization once we go to Mars? Those kind of topics is somehow interestingly more engaging in a way, because I now live in New York City. What I realized, if you work with colonialization, is often like people just group you into like people dealing with the past. And then even though that's extremely contemporary and a future topic, so kind of weaving space into that context really helps me to like open up conversation with people who normally would not really be interested in what the kind of thing I'm trying to talk about. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. And also at the same time, there is international treaty on space, territory. It's just so many possibilities we can kind of engage with people. So in the 60s, for example, we have international treaty, the fact that for any of the outer space bodies that, for example, like spaceship, because the land, once you step out of spaceship, we are nationless. There's not necessarily like which part of the sky belong to which state, but the state power is actually very contained inside the spaceship itself. So like if you have a car there and that car belongs to America, but like outside of car is no one's land in a way. And that's kind of interesting. But now we have another challenge because everyone's trying to go to the moon, and this year is the 50th anniversary of a moon landing. But in fact, both China and US are not able to reach to an international treaty on the moon territory yet. So that's why even at this point that you can land in the moon and just like draw a circle and say this is mine, like, which is kind of bizarre and terrifying at the same time. So those kind of questions is very futuristic, but I feel like it's like very also connected to what happened in the past. And I think it's very fascinating for me to think about it. And on my personal level, the reason I started working with space really has a lot to do with kind of a lack of belief system. It's kind of weird to talk about that in like a public way, but like I grew up in China and I was trained as a scientist or engineer, and at the same time, my hometown, as you probably already know, is like the most dense Muslim community in entire, China territory. So this kind of question about like, what are we supposed to do like in the modern age, like, because I was raised to study hard, to work hard, to invent, to do something. But then like the more you know about science and the world, the more the insignificance of individual is clear to me at least. So this kind of clash between the insignificance of individual existence and kind of ever unique presence of our current moment, it's start to kind of clash a lot in my personal life and also my art practice. And when looking at outer space, it really helped me to have the opportunity to zoom out a little bit and thinking about that problem in a larger way. So I kind of play with this trick a little bit in my talks. Is like I try to like pause a little bit and just to like ask everyone to think that as a matter of fact that everyone like we know and everyone we loved and everyone we probably will ever engage in this world right now and has been ever most of the time is kind of only existing because we're pulled by this unexplainable force, gravity, that down to the earth, which is a very thin layer of the earth. And then, well, we just like stick to the surface and this entire big rock is like floating in the middle of nowhere. And we're not sure where it's gonna go. Like, so for me, I have like moments clicking and thinking about that, while at the same time I'm gonna go for my lunch and probably from Clover, which I don't really like. I feel like that's kind of like, being an artist and being a scientist at the same time and how to reconcile those two facts in one's life. And that's kind of what I started to deal with in my work a lot. And gravity is, one of the saying I'm very interested in now, because just the idea of it exists is so bizarre and so fascinating. I was very lucky I had a weightlifting experience 2 years ago, and it has changed a lot of the way I work. So this is a project, is part of related to that, is that I hope I have a picture. Oh, I don't, but maybe if you are interested, if even Google @wet astronaut, he is, American NASA astronaut who for the first time stepped out of the space station in the 60s. And then there's a very famous picture of him like floating there with this Earth in his background. And he was just kind of like doing nothing. And then he has this golden tether around his chest, which is connecting him back to the space station. And that picture for me is just so beautiful and making me feel like isolated and strange and all the kind of emotions at the same time. Because just exactly like a baby with his umbilical cord connecting to his mother. So that was in the 60s. And I was very shocked by that moment and looking at the picture. There's also videos around that. And I remember in the video he said something like this is when he was stepping back to the space station, and he said that was the saddest moment of his life because his like first time like out and he's like coming back. And I was looking at that picture and thinking about, okay, how about now? Like, are we still at this kind of almost embryo status of humanity that once we step into space, we're like a baby is having umbilical cord connecting? So I also was wondering, kind of like women do better in a way. What I decided is that I want to, instead of like having this umbilical cord thread to just like drag me and protect me to not drift away, I wanted to become my power, become my own gravity. So I got a lot of inspiration from spiders, which I think is like probably the only animal that can like move freely in three-dimensional space without wings and stuff like that. And there's actually a technique by spiders called blooming. There's a really cute videos online, like claymation, that the spider actually, apart from it being able to web and like a real net, it could like shoot its silk out, and the silk is so sticky, and it kind of almost captured the water in the air. And then, like for the silk, the air is almost like a sticky water or like a kind of gel structure. So it can use the silk to drag itself. It's called blooming technique. So it's literally trying to like shoot a thread and drag itself and fly away. It's really cool. You can find it online. So it's basically like Spider-Man. And then inspired of that, after all this, I decided to make myself a spider woman in space. This was in 2017. I was very lucky and got this opportunity through the Space Exploration Initiative. I performed, like this is a device I designed, is like a handheld device, mechanical structure that is like a fishing wire and stuff, and shoot the threads out and rewind itself. And I was able to test it actually in zero gravity. It was a really fascinating experience for me. And I thought, I have a dance background, I was used to do rhythmic gymnastics, I must be great at it, but I was not. I was like swirling, and it was really difficult. So I will show you a bit of video. So all this kind of black background images, I did it underwater, actually in the alumni pool. Oh, yeah. I went there very early in the morning, just put a black fabric down and did my photo shoot. Yeah, because it was interesting. I gave kind of similar talk when I was in ITP, which is another grad school program in New York City, because the students were like, even when I was like still as a student, I always feel like in order to get something like this, you have to have a big budget and all stuff. But then it was not really. Like I borrowed all the things from like friends, like equipment, and just got a big black fabric. I washed it in the machine so it doesn't the color doesn't go away because of the bleach in the pool. And we kind of like booked it for an hour. It's actually really cheap for students in MIT to book the pool, which is only like I think $100 like for 2 hours or something. And I was like, okay, so now all I need is open my eyes on the water. How should I do that? And then later on realized all I need to do is just to actually do it. I was like, it was pretty amazing. And then of course the later of the day I cannot really see anything. But then I got all these pictures and it really helped me to convey what my project idea is and other stuff. So anyway, my point is I was trying to encourage students in ITP is like, even if you have a very small budget or to no budget, if you have an idea, just try to do it. Don't worry too much about it. Yeah. So this is the video in the parabolic flight. And everything is kind of documentation of the performance because I really cannot control what I was supposed to do there. But in the end, I think I liked how it came out. So the poetry is a noiseless patient spider, which is, I forgot his name, very famous American poet. So that was 2017, and ever since then, I think it really had a strong impact on my practice, that experience of losing your weight up there. And it's really interesting that people talk about there's no gravity, but even in space, like gravity always exists. And even if in ISS, gravity always exists. It's just kind of the fact that we're falling at the same time and the habit we're living in reference to each other is why you don't feel it. And then for me, that is a lot to do with the actual kind of metaphorical but also almost literal way of talking about this. No? Okay. Yeah, so in like more and more, I think in my work, I consider the language of science, which is, you know, stereo and like absent of individual, in a way that once a person speaks it, it becomes indulgent and sticky. I try to work with them in a way that the language of science, or it become metaphor, but also very direct to describe how I feel about my practice. So what I think about my next project, which I'm going to share very soon, there's a lot of calculation about, you know, the reaction wheel and the momentum and how does it stabilize in zero gravity. And I just cannot really like give up on the word momentum and the idea of how much you can spin and how much you can stretch. It feels like very intimate when I think about it, and when I do the simulation of those like little devices dragging itself, and I feel like it just as if I'm looking at myself. So I right now having an exhibition in the Museum of Arts and Design. It's a small solo on the 6th floor. It will be until May. So if you're ever in New York City, come to Columbus Circle, which is not the best circle in the world, but there's a museum there. It's called Museum of Arts and Design. And then in there, I kind of trying to explore this entire new way of looking at the idea of self through a more longer duration or like more like distancing way of engaging. The exhibition started with, or when I think about the exhibition, I started with this sentence by Tracy K. Smith, who is the American poet laureate, I think, in 2017. She has this book called Life on Mars. It's beautiful. It's about she mourning her dad, who was a Hubble telescope engineer. It has very little to do with space, but also deeply connected in a personal, emotional way. And one sentence she wrote is, what if dark matter is like the space between people when what holds them together isn't exactly love? So I think when I was working on this exhibition, that is something resonated a lot through the time. So the first work I'm going to share in the exhibition is called A Book of Mine. So it's literally a book of mine because I was interested in my DNA sequence. I did my DNA sequence in about 2016 because of birthday gift. And then after that, it was kind of weird, because I did 23andMe, and they keep sending me emails about, you found a new relative, there's some new facts about you. And it was very bizarre. But at the same time, I don't want someone else to have my data, but at the same time, I do feel like it's very desire to know a bit more about myself. It's almost like a craving for astrology, but it's a modern version of that. So I work with a biologist, a close friend of mine, that we sampled and sequenced my entire genome last year. It was a very complicated process because for genetic information, if you imagine it as taking pictures, we are not able to take entire picture of Sarah yet. All we're gonna do is taking very small picture, which is probably everything is this big, but we'll take 1 million of them randomly. So in total, we're probably gonna cover most of the places on your body, and then we have this entire data collection of small little pieces of you, and then we put it onto a human template and trying to figure out how you actually look like. And the human template itself is also out of thousands of people. That is, collective data that is assembled, recently just finished, right? So it's very interesting that for this entire book is just the base pairs of my genome. And this is volume X, which is the X chromosome of mine. The reason I didn't do the others because it's just too much, I cannot finish. This because we have 3 billion pairs. That means even if I print it to that small letter, it's gonna be 20,000 pages. And for this book, what I did is, this is an accordion book. So the way you make it is that you print, for me at least, you print 16 pages on the rice paper at a time, and you fold it 8 times. And then you accordion bound them together. So I made this one all by hand, which is 900 pages. And then when you look at it, you can see part of it is a little bit whiter color than the other one, just a little bit it's queer words. Sorry, it's not that clear, but you can see that is the traces, how the kind of assembly process left, because those parts are still not able to be captured. So that's really interesting process for myself, because every night I was in New Ink, actually, in New Museum, that after everyone left, because during the day there are lots of people working around there, I would like move all the table together and put a butcher paper on top of them, and then having this long row of rice paper, and I start like folding them because it's so long. Each page, each time I fold is almost like, I don't know, 5 meters. So I kind of would like run away, like doing this folding. It's kind of almost like a dance at night. It was like a meditative process for me. And it's really interesting in the end to see this book in display. And I just kind of thinking about how I'm like this program and like staring at my source code, but I'm not able to really understand what it means. So across from that book, this is another work. It's called Faces. It's kind of specifically made for the exhibition because of certain structure we are required to have. But you can see the back panel there are actually the landscape of my hometown. And then on the top of it, there are 2 mouths, which is, one is a cast of my mouth, the other one is a wood carving. And this one is really interesting. It is actually bronze, so like this. But the reason it is so, have this white layer on top of it is because we cool it down the metal to -4 Celsius-ish. So because it's so cold on the surface of it, start to draw water from the air and create this like layer of frost on top of it. And it was an interesting process for me because I was kind of imagining like when you first step out of like outer space and like your mouth just like all frozen up and how your body changes. That's kind of why I started to like visualize this work. And then another one on the side is carved with cedar wood and then later burned, so it's carbonized. So together these 2 panels are faces, and then one is water and metal and one is fire and wood. And for me, they are not as heavily storytelling as my other piece, but I feel like it's a really nice background to carry lots of the other work I have done so far. And this, particularly for the this metal cooling system, is actually in collaboration with Gershon, who's sitting over there. Yeah, he helped me a lot with the exhibition. And the reason I was doing this mouth-related work and stuff is actually related to my current project, which is called Everything Beautiful is Far Away. And this is really what I've been working on for the past almost a year or 2 at this point. This is a little device I'm making. Sorry, the slide's a little bit out of date because it's like, I'm in the midst of production right now. But it's a little sculpture. I'll say it looks more like this, having a shell outside of it. I think I have a mock-up here. Yeah, actually. Yes, so it's kind of looking more like this. And in the middle of it, it's right now in display in the museum, it's also printed. But we're making it out of, actual mechanical system, aluminum motor and stuff. So this little device, to me, is like an avatar of myself, I would say, at this point. This glass shell is like the body, and then the mechanical, like there's spuns and the shooters and all the stuff is kind of like, your metabolic processes or your organ. And at the very core of it, there's actually a wisdom teeth, which is also from myself. I pulled it out in Massachusetts, somewhere in Porter Square, I think. And it was also a very funny story. But so yeah, I think it's this one, yeah. And this entire sculpture is gonna be launched into outer space the end of April in collaboration with Almighty Space Exploration Initiative and Blue Origin. So once it go up there in outer space, what it will do is kind of similarly like what I did in a parabolic flight. So the mechanism of its moving is like shooting thread and dragging itself. So you're gonna experience 3 minutes of, that's exciting. 3 minutes of zero gravity, and we kind of like curated this entire sequence of it to be released and shoot threads and drag itself. And then after 3 minutes, it will come back to the Earth. And then through that process, it will go through atmosphere, which causes a lot of vibration and shaking. And because the outside shell is made of borosilicon glass, it will all scatter and turn into pieces. So for me, it's almost like, this little creature or avatar of myself that is having an entire another life up there in space. And for me, it's a really weird process because it feels like almost like giving birth in a way. But of course, I'm not having a kid yet. Like there's a process at this point. I feel like because work is so hard, just imagining making a robot in space, it started to get much more agency than I thought I would not give it to this device. It kind of requires me to do so much work for it. I have to like accommodating to whatever is need up there. And then everything gonna just happen, and then I'm going to, having the similar GoPro camera to capture everything. And I would not know what happened until it comes back down to the Earth, and I open the box and see it again. So that's kind of what I'm mainly working on right now. And this project for me is really important in a way that it captures lots of different aspects of what I've been thinking. Like I think from the first slides till this point. Lots of people ask me like why teeth and all these kind of questions. It's interesting that like when I put the tooth out in here, one thing is that, like in Massachusetts, when you pull your teeth out, you can actually keep it. But if you do it in New York City or New York State in general, you are not allowed to. Because like supposed to be like once your body is amputated from you, it's a nation-owned thing. So it was very lucky of me that actually, I like did a little bit of research. Because I was showing this project in New York City, people were like, you cannot get your teeth there. I was like, why? How come? Like, I was like, I did it in Massachusetts. So I was very lucky. And then when I was putting my teeth out at the time, I did not plan for this project, of course. It just when I have it, it was like such a, little creature, has little like a shiny surface on the top of it. I don't know what to do, so I just kept it. And then when I was proposing this project, I was more thinking about dance performance in 0G. But then when I was moving to New York City and packing everything, I was looking at the teeth and thinking about, well, you know what, I think it makes sense, everything now. So it's a process of growing together with this work rather than I know exactly what it's gonna be. And I think at this point, I would still not know what's gonna happen up there. And it's a very strange feeling of, massive failure ahead of you at the same time, but also like there's no failure whatsoever, which I think is really interesting as an artist to think about what it means to make a piece. And for me, of course, it's a professional work. There's lots of hope to get a successful work out of it. But for me, deeply, I think it's more a ceremony I'm trying to create with all this kind of work and labor for myself and probably for the first time. So this is what I'm working on right now, and it's gonna be launched the end of April. So yeah, hopefully I will let you guys know if something nice come out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I live sometimes thinking about if there's any questions and stuff like that.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Going back to the very first
work. Yeah.
How many tears did you collect in a month? How much
What was the
It
bottom
was
of
really,
tears?
so like when you do experiments, you cannot just have a little bit, right? Like when you do any chemical related experiment, there's a minimum amount you need to have. And then because the tear water also evaporates and all the stuff, so I have to like generate fresh tears basically. So I would say about 10 millimeter a day. But I have to also admit there's at least 3 or 4 days I just couldn't cry anymore. So yeah, I would say like a lot, yeah.
That's a lot of tears.
Yeah, and it's very hard to collect because you know it kind of like goes
That was
all
going to
the
be my next question. How do you?
yeah. So I have this little. My friend actually made a tear catcher for me that could like kind of go underneath your eyelid, which has this kind of weird flower-ish like shape on the top. Because otherwise, with things like this, it's just gonna go away, and then you cannot really collect the liquid very well. Yeah.
Could you say a little more about the documentation of the project you're doing now? You mentioned a GoPro camera.
Mm-hmm.
So what, and you're obviously documenting the process and the
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you go through, but so what will the how are you imagining that? What will it see? How do you make decisions about that?
Yeah, so
Process.
basically what I have is not like the outer space, I can do everything about it. Like what I have is a locker. So inside Blue Origin's flight, there are like they're basically a space castle, and inside of it is lockers, and I have one of the lockers, which is about this big. So my device is super tiny, it's like the size of my fist. So
there
this,
are a bunch of lockers with different artists?
yeah, oh, they are all scientists, I think. So it's kind of weird when and like because we have calls together, and everyone else is like, oh, this is like a NASA some experiment. I'm like,
Sending my tooth to that.
this is my teeth. Yeah, so I have to like really like hold myself, and then like it's okay. Yeah. So my device is like this big, and everything is inside the locker. So my camera has to be inside too. So that's why it has to be very small, tiny GoPros. And then it would not be released into like the actual vacuum space. So it will be pressurized. It's more about the weightlessness rather than like space environment per se. Yeah.
And for illumination?
Yeah, we inside locker, you can do whatever you want. So I have LED, light stage design a little bit, not too crazy. Yeah.
And how does the robotics work with inside? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, so it's like I can show you something cooler, but can you see it? Well, maybe when my device opens up. So you can see it's like these two are shooters, and this is the camera, and this is spawn, this is a reaction wheel. So basically, there are threads, like I have like CO2 tanks, and once it got poked, and then the air would push like 2 small tiny magnets out, and which has threads connecting on the back of it. Is like, and then there's a spawn in the middle that would rewind and control the way the threads is gonna be like in tension or not. So it's very similar like what I did earlier in the parabolic flight, but in a more integrated robotic system. Yeah, so I don't have a very good. I was trying to show you the 3D model, but I don't know why my computer is a bit crashing right now. 1 second.
How do you control the tension of the thread? Is it in the
Yeah, so basically,
in a gravity-free environment?
so everything it just has to be like pre-calculated, like having like a guess of what's going on, and like at the same time, not necessarily fully aware of everything, because I cannot, for example, the way it's stabilized is through something called momentum biasing. So it's kind of like a gyroscope, so the reaction was spinning inside. But because I only have one, I cannot do altitude control and all the stuff, because the device itself is so small. So something like that. Yeah. So like the thread will shoot from here, and this is a spawn, and there's a flywheel, there's a motor and battery and boards and camera. And then there's our CO2 tanks, which will shoot airs out of it. Yeah. So it's like not that difficult a device, to my opinion, but because it's so tiny, it gets, difficult.
How long is it going to be up
The actual 0G itself is only 3 minutes. It's like, so I'm working, it's almost gonna be like a music video, I think. So you're gonna release. I can show you the actual process of the launch itself. So like launching with a new chapter system. So it will lift off, and then once it reach to 100 kilometers, there's separation, and the capsule will free float. During that time is like the 0G, and then through here I'm gonna have 3 minutes uninterrupted zero gravity, where my device can do the performance, and then comes back and then land with parachute, and then probably in 4 hours I can retrack everything.
I think it's really interesting to think about your earlier project with the tears and now the tooth. And so it's organic and biologically focused, but you're also it's additive because you have the robotic capability now too. Do they let, and I really also was, I find it so appealing, like the isolation that the space gives with these rare human specimens that are only here attached or stuck on the Earth, as you said, for a certain period of time. Nobody can leave anything out there in space, I assume. You can't just like leave your tooth.
Yeah, that's a bit space trash, which is a little bit unethical. So I'm happy it comes back. And also I think it's because now I think a lot about cosmology and different cultures looking at space in different way. I think at least maybe, I don't know, for Chinese people, it's less about going out there. I think what matters is what's coming back and that process itself. There's a really interesting, it's not a great film, but it's interesting to watch. It's called The Wandering Earth. I think it was on the big cinema like this last month. I watched it in New York. It's based on this novel by Chinese science fiction author Liu Cixin. He also wrote The Three-Body Problem. And the story is that the sun is going to explode in 1,000 years or 2,000 years. So the humanity, in order to survive, will have to, figure out somewhere else to live. So I think a little bit like abruptly, it's like if we're doing a purely Hollywood way, we're probably going to build a spaceship and go to find a new land, Star Trek. But in kind of this Chinese author's view, that or maybe in Chinese people's view, if you leave your land, you are not those people anymore. So instead of building a spaceship and finding a new land, in the plot, he took the Earth with people. So there's huge engines made on the back of the Earth. Yeah, and then the entire Earth is wandering out of the solar system, which is not scientifically, but I think it's very interesting, the kind of the choices people make in face of crisis, or the value system we have in terms of what to go and what to come back. Yeah.
So that gives me an opening in trying to figure out how to ask this question. But it isn't so fantastical, it's just a footnote. We have plasma reactors here, so when blue goes up to a larger size, the idea of moving the Earth out of its orbit a bit is not that fantastical.
Yeah.
And Xin Liu, after all, is a power engineer. So
yeah.
I was thinking that always. So your projects are just mind-blowing and fantastic.
Thank you.
Loved listening to it all. But I'm really intrigued by, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm really intrigued by the separation from people that all of these projects are. They're all about isolation. But one of the themes throughout is detachment and coming back. And of course I was fascinated by the fact that you're from Xinjiang and the Uyghur population, but that you're from the Chinese who came into, I'm assuming, into the population. So I'm wondering about, and you just referred to this idea of internal connections to the cosmos and the land, feng shui, and all of those kinds of notions. So I'm wondering if there's a way to build into all of this. I have two parts to the question. One is these historical connections, these connections of, and you also said within your own educational history, you were initially trained not to have belief, right? So let's get rid of tradition, let's get rid of history, let's get rid of all the stuff that Xin Liu actually keeps on the earth, because the earth then explodes into civil war between those who want to leave the orbit and those who want to stay. So all of that is modeled, and his trilogy starts with the Cultural Revolution as well.
Exactly.
So he never gives up on these social aspects, which is really interesting. So one is where you might build these cultural components into all of this, and the other is the flip side of that, which is I'm fascinated by all of the people you had to work with in order to create these things. So you worked with a geologist, you worked with a biologist, and so on. And I wonder if you could say something more about the experience of those kinds of collaborations. Because after all, that's, in my field, science studies, that's a huge topic of how you get these disciplines to talk to each other, because you're usually talking past each other.
Yeah, definitely. So for the first question, I think that's something I've been dealing a lot with myself and trying to figure out a way. 2 days ago, I just had a chat with my friend who works primarily around history, and I work primarily about future, whatever you see it. So I think I have to be very honest. Like, if I talk about history, I cannot avoid my own upbringing, but I cannot talk about my upbringing for the current political environment and atmosphere in my hometown. So that's the part I kind of really gear avoiding, but also, you know, coming back, and it's almost like a planet you can never really touch. You're just like swirling around it.
Just a footnote. I mean, the third camp of that initial set of images that you put up of your hometown and the oil fields and the hometown. Well, the third image that obviously pops into my mind are the concentration camps now.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. But as an artist, I think there is a limit. Well, I'm an artist, I'm a cultural producer, but I'm also a daughter. So there's a limit of the kind of topic I can publicly engage in my work. But I think I've tried my best in a way to remind people as much as possible. And in terms of the other topic about collaboration, I think lots of it has to do like a way of communication. Like, what I realized is, like, one discipline encounter each other, even though you want a collaboration, you kind of still work with the assumption that the other person will never really understand what you're doing. Like, especially for artists, they're like, oh, you don't have to know the theory I came up with or this crazy, fantastical thoughts I have. I'm just curious about how to get this done. Like, that's often the case when I try to facilitate collaboration with people, and also kind of frustrate me. I think we're underestimating a lot of times that how others can understand ourselves and knowing what each of us are doing. So when I work with any other discipline who I don't know well, I try to ask questions as much as possible to really know what they're talking about, not just trying to get a result, but actually like study. So like I learned a lot about through the process. And at the same time, I kind of almost have to give artist talk all the time to my collaborators, so they know me and why I do these kind of things. And I want them to be emotionally invested in my work. And I have to say, I'm not hiring people hire for work most of the time. It's a collaboration. So I don't want to be like ask for something to be done and then this is now your business. So it's really a friendship development at the same time. So for example, the biologist I work with, I recently introduced him to a new girlfriend. So like it's like I think it's very healthy to treat like collaborator just like someone you truly love, and the reason I work with them is not just because of their knowledge in their discipline, but their knowledge about lots of things. Like the people I work with tend to love arts in general. They tend to be curious. They tend to read a lot. That's why they are willing to help me. So it's really a hit by luck situation. I have approached people who have no interest in what I'm doing whatsoever. And I'm not like a famous artist that could make people just work for me because I'm, famous or something like that. So it's really down to the fact that you are actually interested in the topic I'm exploring, and maybe to the very small percentage, it could be beneficial for your own work also. Yeah.
Well, that's the part I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that an art practice like yours is actually a kind of probe for other disciplines of doing things that they don't have permission to do within their disciplinary boundaries. So it really is an opening up. It's a vehicle for cross-disciplinary work.
Yeah. I think it's really very interesting process that the biologist I work on the genetic project is actually someone who first helped me with my rocket project, because his side hobby is to be a mechanic. And I'm a mechanical engineer, so I kind of helping him a little bit, and then realizing he's a biologist, so then he can help me a little bit. So I have to say it's very lucky for me to meet all these friends and be able to work with them. And I tend to work with same group people again, rather than trying to find new collaborator all the time. Yeah.
It really struck me that in the documentation of you using the Spider-Woman device, I really like how there's a bunch of people in the space, and there's somebody who's kind of helping you stabilize and get into position so that you can do the activity. Because even though the piece is kind of about this like separation and reconnection and solitude and so on, there's these other people around you, including this person putting their hands on you, on your body. I just thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I really, at the beginning, thought I can do it, but I was like, no. She is a retired pilot, and it's amazing. She can even stand still and hold me in 0G. Oh my God, it's insane. And it was very fascinating, actually. We kept in contact even now. I'm doing another parabolic flight in May this year. So hopefully I'll see her again and she can help me again.
I have two questions. One, I'd love to hear about the Space Initiative too, and your role there, and what's going on with that, and the leadership around it.
Yeah, definitely.
And then secondly, just a curious, you're doing this floating in space and feelings of isolation, and then also collaboration, and then you went into a pool. Now that's not the ocean, but it is water, and I was curious if there were similar experiences, what was different.
Yeah,
Did
my
you
next
think about
project.
that at all in your exploration?
Yeah, my next 0G. So I was. Well, this is like a kind of hidden joy of myself. I used to be I'm still a big fan of manga and stuff, so I used to do cosplays and things like that. So for Orbit Weaver, I actually have this whole like character setting. I had my friend to help me with, and if you can find it. So for my next project, so like, the first is like a spider woman, right? So my next project, I'm gonna be like a ocean creature mermaid or something. Probably mermaid, not mermaid, like a jellyfish or something. Because I was looking at my hair in 0G, I was like, wow, that was really interesting. And Orbit Weaver is really about how body entirely move in space. But I'm also fascinated by, just more like the structure itself attached to the body is like morphing and like changing in that particular environment. So yes, my next project, I'm working with not really a company, more like an NGO. They are doing a lot of ocean exploration, and we're trying to look at using plastic recycled from the ocean to make kind of a costume and having this creative things to be performed in zero gravity. But this is like one of the things I was having my friend drew for me when I was like at the very beginning of this project. I was like drew this idea of this character I'm gonna embody one day. Yeah. So in the end, I found this part of the storytelling getting more and more incorporate into my practice. And to the Space Exploration Initiative, if people don't know about it here, the initiative is more like an umbrella structure in MIT Media Lab instead of a group. So we work with everyone in the lab and also work with overall MIT in general. I would keep trying to expand in a collaborative way. So the initiative, the goal is trying to look at space exploration in a way that is beyond the current, rocket development or spaceship, like things that is related to space exploration, but beyond just the ability to get there. We're asking the questions like, what do we do when we get there? So in a scientific way, we talk about agriculture, we talk about architecture, we talk about air quality, like we even talk about like currency, talk about politics. And also on the culture side, which is mainly my job, is really about like cultural diversity. What is a cultural production once we go up there? Is it going to be the same, or just a reflection, or are we having more possibility to explore certain things we have done wrong differently? And we are having our Beyond Cradle annual event this Thursday, so it'll be very exciting. This is also the Apollo landing 50th anniversary this year. So actually this is like a space week in MIT. Our space department is having an event on Wednesday, and our event will be on Thursday. I have invited this group of fantastic artists to share their own journey thinking about space exploration. Laura Anderson would be there, Tomas Saraceno would be there, so it's kind of exciting. And for my job, lots of time I see it in like two folds. One is like helping people in MIT to push their project further. Because what I realized when I was a student here, I would do a thing. I mean, you always do a thing like a prototype or something, and then the teacher pat your head, like great. But then for any artistic experience, the finishing is super important. Like it's not just an idea, it's like how actually the process itself is like deployed. So I'm trying to create different exhibition opportunities, research trips for students and researchers to be able to develop their work in deeper way. So we just sent several people to Chile, Atacama Desert to study ELMA telescope this past January, and we had an exhibition last year in Ars Electronica to present the work in a holistic way. So that's kind of what I do on campus, and encourage students, of course, to do more work related to this topic. And outside, I'm also bringing in visiting artists to do talks, workshops, and we just launched 2 open calls, one with the New Ink New Museum and the other one with LACMA in LA, to support artists whoever selected by the museum. We are not going to interfere too much about their selection process, but once they're selected as this kind of space artists or designer or creatives, I will try my best to provide an open access to the artists and cultural producers to get into MIT and work with people here. So it's a little bit more like anti-disciplinary or transdisciplinary facilitation in a way that helps to make the conversation happen. And talking about the leadership, which is really fascinating, I believe we're the only kind of space program which is actually also launching things to space. Like they're saying, like, you don't launch to space, you're not a real space program. So I believe we're the only space program that is majority led by women. I believe so. The actual core staff member, I would say 80% are women, and that's also resulting in a very fascinating fact that I think yesterday we got applause by a director from NASA that she thinks that our programming in general is the most diverse and female well-presented conferences and programmings in the United States, because we're very, very, very diligent in that process and trying to make sure the gender and people of color having the opportunities. And it's actually really, really difficult, I have to say. Like, if you want to find a high-profile people of color female representative to talk about space exploration, you have to dig very deep to find them. And I really hope what we did in the initiative is giving voice to this particular group of people that is going to shape, our future of space exploration. And yeah, and we are having visiting artist Ignis coming in Friday. I'll share the talk information. That would be great if people can come over. Yeah.
Will it be documented at all?
Yes,
Will
yes.
it be a
Yeah, so for Beyond Cradle, we're going to have live stream through National Geographic. And for Ignis talk, we're going to have a video documentation, which CAST is going to take care of it. Yeah.
Any more?
Oh, sorry. So, the only art I'm aware of in space, right, is there's that Andy Warhol ceramic disc on the moon. There's the Voyager 1 records, and I guess the Banksy sculpture that was launched by SpaceX. And so, you're joining, that's kind of, I think that might be the only 3 pieces of art ever to exit the stratosphere.
No.
That's not true.
No,
There's a lot more. Yeah.
But it's very interesting. Right?
Some of it actually began here at MIT
There's a whole
back in the
history of
80s.
Really? Okay, so
Yeah.
people are
Space
setting
Shuttle,
out
Space Shuttle had an art program.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I think that's very interesting, right? Because I'm, not at all an artist.
That's because you're not old enough to remember.
That's a fair point.
Yeah,
I
but-
think
But
that's
most
just
of
very
them
interesting.
are white male. If you look at female represented artists or identified or trans, I would say I don't know many. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's just really a compliment. I just think it's very interesting, right? Because I would have never thought of the practice of launching art in space. And at least with like the Voyager records, they're kind of serving a purpose that's, that's very intentive, right? To do something kind of for the purpose of artistry and personal exploration. I think is a cool way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very fascinating. Of course, it's like a very privileged opportunity. So that's something I feel like I took it very seriously and thinking about this rather expensive opportunity. What would you do to make it worth it? Yeah. This is a lot of pressure in a way also. Yeah.
Maybe you said this, but what do you hope to measure when it's out there? When you said you're going to document it, what do you
Yeah,
hope
it's
to
like
see?
I have a sequence of performance I hope it can do. But well, it will actually do it or not, I don't know. Because, even for the rocket, there's a 50% of chance it's going to just like crash or stuff like that. So at this point, I'm just like letting the fit take me to wherever it's going. And I try my best to produce the best engineering work I can produce. And I feel like what is up there is living its own life. Yeah, but what I'm going to have is a video documentation.
I really like this image a lot. It's an interesting mix of like fan art of you and also like a character you're embodying.
Yeah.
So there's this cool like referential loop.
Yeah.
And you've talked a lot about, you've mentioned performance and like background and other performance arts as well. I was wondering like how like the process that you're kind of pointing out with the Spider-Woman embodiment plays out in some of the other work that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think performance and character building is really helpful for me in order to like kind of detach a little bit from this like identity of an artist or like whoever you are. I am always very envy of performance artists who can just step in and be there and do stuff. I still having difficulty to do that. My performance background is more in dance, so it's very choreography-based, kind of rigid way of performing. I talk with my body, but it's like it's still difficult for me to like very much open up, having a direct emotional connection with the audience, which you can tell from my Tier project. So I think it's really a slow process for me to work through it. And I think Orbit Weaver, this picture kind of is a nice layer for me to feel like protected and also be able to engage with the character. I'm imagining who you can say it's me, it's not me, it's a safe place. But nowadays, I think I'm trying to, you know, push myself further. I just applied for the Watermill Center residency. I don't know if I can get in, but I was kind of excited about this idea to, you know, be pushed to do something I would never feel comfortable doing myself. And yeah, I'm curious about what that's gonna lead my practice to. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.